Hello everybody and welcome to Liam Griffith's Steam, and for those of you who have seen my videos before, welcome back. This is going to be a slightly different type of video to my usual content today, and this video we're going to be following the repainting and sort of smartening up of this Burrell traction engine here. So I guess we'll start with first things first. This is Burrell traction engine number 3519. Built in 1913, it's an 8 nominal horsepower double crank compound, and she's owned by the Canterbury Steam Preservation Society, which run Steam Scene out at McLean's Island here in Christchurch, which is in New Zealand for those who are overseas and don't know. And to start with, what you'll notice about the machine is that she's a bit tired looking. There's lots of areas of the engine where, well, she's currently carrying about 4 different paint jobs, and they span from different eras, the oldest being its original paint, which you'll see in a minute there's quite a bit of, coupled with a good coat of black and some red lines that were put on the engine in the 60s, I believe, in the early days of preservation when the rallies were just starting up in this country. And then we've got a bit more black that's been done a bit more recently, and other bits and pieces where the magic red paintbrush has graced the engine's presence. So looking a bit closer, you can see on the tender that there's a few different layers of paint there. The yellow line that you see and the colour around that is original paint from when the engine was built. The black with the red lines was put on in the sort of the 60s, as I mentioned, and there's a bit of artistic flair. You can see that they are based on what was there originally, if you know Burrell lining, but they've clearly taken a few liberties with the artistic license as well. Looking around the rest of the engine, you can see that there's a lot of places where the paint is quite rough. There's the wheels and the gear guards. It's all very tired and quite tatty looking. The gear guards actually have original lining on them, and I wonder if they've ever really had much attention at all in the whole engine's working life. There's a lot of original paint on those items. You'll also notice that the tender has also got a few rust holes in it, which is far from ideal really. What we like is a tender that contains the load that it carries, i.e. coal and water, and having holes is a good way for it not to do that. You can also see original lining showing through on the horn plates and on the front wheels as well, and a few other bits of the engine which have not seen a lot of attention really. Then the belly tank and the lagging sheets, they've been painted more recently with a reasonably nice coat of black paint. The lagging sheets themselves are pretty knackered though. They will need replacing eventually, and you'll see down the track why. The front axle, springs and forecarriage are also painted in a black, which is quite nice. However, unfortunately, due to the plans I have with the engine, that black paint has got to go. I might also add that on behalf of the society that owns the engine, I have the fortunate role of being the custodian to the engine for the club, so I'm basically in charge of its upkeep and its maintenance and doing all this kind of work, and I count myself very lucky, and this video series that I'm producing is quite dear to me because this is a journey that I've been on with the engine, with of course the help from a lot of fantastic people who really do shine and know what they're doing, and they've been exceptional. So a big thank you to those involved as well who have helped me out. I'll try and credit you as I go, and I'll try not to leave anybody out. So with those ramblings over, we make a start. So the first thing that you'll see is when I started sanding the tender, a bit more original paint showed up, and this sign writing showed up on the back, on the very rear of the tender, which you can't read it too well in this photo, but what it says is Agents for New Zealand, Reed and Gray, Dunedin. So Reed and Gray were a company that had the agency for Burrells, as you may have already gathered, and they had the agency to bring the Burrells to New Zealand from about 1903 onwards, and I believe that this was written on the back of more or less all of the Burrells that came to New Zealand, as well as a plate that went on the toolbox, which also said Reed and Gray, Dunedin, which is very cool, a nice little bit of history there. Fortunately, that piece with the nice sign writing on it was actually a piece that I had to cut out, because the next thing I needed to do was to patch that section of the tender where the rust holes were, and you can see here as well that now that it's cut out, there was another patch that was put on the inside of the coal bunker, because obviously those plates were getting thin a long time ago, but that patch itself now is also, as you can see, pretty rotten and was rusting through in a few places, so the whole lot had to be chopped out and a new piece welded in, and yeah, quite essential really, had to be done. So as you can see, a little bit of paint prep has now started. I've patched that hole in the tender, and I've now got a little bit of primer on. You'll notice that there's a few areas where there's still pitting visible on the tender there, and that will be sorted out at a later date, but the main focus was to just get that area prepared and primed to protect it from rust and elements. You can see here with the double spur hood or gear guard or splasher or whatever you want to call it removed, there's a bit of original lining showing through there once it got sanded, which is very helpful, as you'll see down the track, because it's finding lining like this along with a few other references I've managed to find which help to piece together how the engine originally was. So I mentioned before about the magic red paintbrush. Well, now it's time for a visit from the magic black brush. And so several of the parts off the engine were taken off, cleaned up and painted black, and just doing these little things, you know, they're small steps, but once you've done a few of them it really starts to make a difference. The front smoke box door ring also got painted black. You might remember before that was red. I do believe that Burrell's smoke box door rings were supposed to be painted black. A lot of them are red, and I don't think they look horrible in red, but for my own satisfaction and sanity, it had to be black. A whole heap of the bright work on the engine had to be shined up, had paint removed, you name it. And when I say bright work, what that refers to is parts of the engine which are either steel or cast iron or wrought iron or whatever, and Burrell originally presented them shiny, unpainted, just polished, bright, presented brightly, and so you'll see that a lot of parts have to be shined up and made bright again. What you see here are the rollers for the rear winch. What I'll also mention is that the engine was then moved outdoors. You can see the back wheels are now off, and the idea of moving it outdoors was to get a steam cleaner in and basically power wash the whole thing, get a lot of the muck off, and just all round get it sort of in the very, very early stages to accept paint. Obviously there's a long way to go yet. You'll notice there that the tender has received a bit more attention. A few of those pitting marks have now been filled in and sorted out, so that's all a little bit smoother, a little bit more close to receiving a top coat. After giving the engine a good steam cleaning, what was interesting is that a lot of the original paint then shone through. That black paint that was put on in the 60s sort of just blew away, and what was left behind was heaps of original colour and lines from when the engine was new. You can see it on the front wheels, you can see it on the tender, and on the front axle and everything too. The front forecarriage had some lines put on it, which I don't believe are original. I believe that they were put on probably in the 60s when the engine got done up. There may have been lines there originally. Burrell did paint lines on their lower forecarriage, but these are not to the original design. The front spring as well, you can see at some point got a bit of loving, and the front pin as well from the magic red paintbrush. I do believe the lines on the front axle, however, are original, as later on I discovered that they are clearly on the original paint and not on top of any sort of other coat of paint that was put on afterwards, which is good because they are the same pattern that Burrell would have put on there. The cylinder block also just got a little bit of a tidy up. There was just quite a bit of flaking paint that was on there, just because the cylinder block gets very hot and it burns off just about any paint you throw at it. So as you can see, the engine is now just about ready to get some paint, or at least, you know, on a few different pieces. The belly tank, or front tanks, the horn plates, the flywheel, the tender are all more or less ready to go. I decided not to paint the front axle and fork carriages just yet, as you'll see in another part, they needed a lot more work yet before they should have received paint. And so as you'll see coming up, it would have in part 2 perhaps, it would have been foolish to put a nice coat of paint on them just yet. Now I can hear you all asking me about this colour. What colour is the engine going to get painted? Well, what you see here is what is known as Burrell Quaker Green. Now, I know this is Quaker Green, and hear me out. So, down in Southland, there is a roller, a Burrell roller, and it carries the same colour. Now, of all the Burrells to come to New Zealand, I'm fairly sure that this roller is one of, if not the only one, to have it stated from when it was built that it was painted Quaker Green. All of the other build sheets I've seen are just blank when it says, you know, there's no noted colour. So this roller was Quaker Green. Now the fella that restored the engine a few years ago, Callum, he decided to repaint the engine exactly the colour that he found on it, which, yeah, it's the same colour. And so, by process of elimination, it's got to be Quaker Green, hasn't it? So I guess now the big question is, what colour is the engine going to get painted? Well, you know, I do actually like engines that carry bright colours, you know, Showman's engines with their yellow wheels, and, you know, there's a lot of nice engines out there in some various shades of red and blues and greens, and I think bright colours are good. They attract a crowd, people like what they see, you know, people are drawn to bright colours, and it helps to encourage you to keep the engine nice and clean and tidy looking. I had originally intended actually to paint the engine a sort of an olive green, like Burrell's Surprise. Well, have I got a surprise for you, because in the end I decided to paint the engine straw, Burrell straw. Nah, just kidding. It was Quaker Green. It had to be Quaker Green. It was always going to be Quaker Green. As soon as I found that original colour, that was the colour she was always going to be. I feel like you guys must have seen that coming. I mean, you've probably figured out already that I'm quite pedantic. So, Quaker Green it is. A friend of mine from work, who is a very talented painter, came and gave me a hand to paint the engine, like the tender and the belly tank and the flywheel and everything you see there, the gear guards. And I personally am absolutely stoked with how it turned out. Michael is a very talented painter, and yeah, he did a great job there. So anyways, you can see the engine's now coming back together. She's slowly getting a few more parts added, the back wheels and the chimneys and so on. And this was because here at the club we host an event called the Steam Extravaganza every year, which is New Zealand's largest steam rally, I might add. And this engine had to be going for it, as an obligation for the club engine is to run the rides trailer, which makes perfect sense because club engine, club responsibilities. So the engine was sort of hastily put back together at this point, and she ran at the Steam Extravaganza. Now, we've received another visit from our good old friend, the magic red paintbrush. I decided that painting the inside of the coal bunker red was a good idea. There's a few engines out there that have it. Now, some sources say it should be black, some sources say it should be red. The footplates on Burrells were generally painted red in areas. The main thing here is that it's a thick coat of paint protecting the steel from any kind of corrosion and erosion caused by wet coal. So let's be thankful for that. If down the track it gets booed off the stage, we can paint it black, but red it is. I had also previously repainted the footplate quite early on in my time looking after the Burrell. I sort of went for an Indian red, which looked nice, but that was sort of before I became a real nerd on these things and went on a tirade of research. And so, although that colour looks quite nice, it couldn't stay. It was too unprototypical, and again, you know, it would have been a great source of many headaches for myself. So when I steam cleaned the engine, a lot of that paint also kind of blew away, which is convenient. It left the footplate in an absolute state, but at least now it gave me a good excuse to get painting on that front. Anyways, here is the engine at the Steam Extravaganza, giving rides to the public. You can see that although it's lovely, it's a Burrell, and Burrells always look great, as we know. She does look like a bit of a mung bean, obviously very incomplete, but it's a sign of things to come. She probably looks worse at the end of this video than she did at the start, but I hope if you continue to watch this series, you'll see a gradual improvement. I certainly hope so. Anyways, you might be watching this shaking your head and thinking, oh, what has he done? And if you have, drop a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Anyways, that's the end of part 1. Thank you very, very much for watching, and we will see you in part 2.